You are not my wife anymore.
Then show them my signed release.
He divorced her before his company went public. Now she controls the shares that can destroy him. Before we begin, may I ask you for a small favor? Please like, subscribe, and stay until the end. Your support helps our channel grow and keeps more emotional stories like this coming. Thank you for watching. He handed her divorce papers beside the calendar that would make him a billionaire. Celine Whitaker stood in the glass-walled penthouse above Tribeca, looking down at Manhattan as evening turned the Hudson River into a dark ribbon of light. The apartment was too quiet for a marriage ending. No raised voices. No broken dishes. No slammed doors. Only the soft hum of the climate system, the faint pulse of traffic 40 stories below, and the clean white envelope Davenport Hale had placed on the marble dining table as if it were a business proposal. Beside it sat another document he had forgotten to hide, the internal schedule for Hale Point Analytics going public. Roadshow prep, investor meetings, final filings, opening bell target date circled in blue ink. Celine read the calendar first. Then she looked at the envelope. That was when she understood the order of his priorities. Davenport stood near the bar cart in a charcoal sweater and tailored trousers, handsome in the controlled way that had once made rooms lean toward him. His dark blonde hair was still perfect. His watch still caught the light. His voice, when he finally spoke, had been polished until nothing human clung to the edges. I think we both knew this was coming, he said. Celine looked at him for a long second. 8 years of marriage stood between them, along with late nights, investor calls, contracts corrected at kitchen counters, and all the years she had spent turning his confidence into something banks could trust. Did we? She asked. Davenport's jaw moved once. He had prepared for tears, maybe anger, maybe the kind of confusion that would let him become gentle and therefore innocent. He had not prepared for her to sound almost curious. We have grown in different directions, he said. The company is entering a new phase. My life is entering a new phase. I do not want us to damage each other by pretending. On the table, his phone lit up. Celine did not mean to look, but betrayal has a way of stepping into the light without being invited. A message from Vivian Cross appeared on the screen. Investors loved us tonight. You were perfect. Davenport saw Celine see it. For the first time, something moved across his face too quickly to name. Not shame. Management. Vivian is part of the communications team, he said. Celine almost smiled. Communications. That was what men like Davenport called a woman when they were not ready to say replacement. She stepped closer to the table and touched the edge of the IPO calendar with one finger. The paper was thick, expensive, meant for boardrooms and banks, not wives who were supposed to sign quietly and disappear before the celebration. So this is not a divorce conversation, she said. It is a timing strategy. Davenport set down his glass. That is unfair. No, Celine said softly. Unfair is asking me to leave the story before the market reads the ending. Outside, Manhattan glittered like it belonged to whoever could afford the view. Davenport walked to the table and pushed the envelope a few inches toward her. The settlement is generous. You will be protected. There it was. Protected. Not honored. Not credited. Protected, like a liability he intended to contain before the bankers arrived. Celine looked at the envelope, then at the calendar, then at the man who had once promised her that if Hale Point ever became real, her name would belong on it. She did not pick up the pen. She did not open the envelope. She simply reached into her handbag, took out the small leather notebook she carried to every meeting, and wrote down the date printed beside the opening bell target. Davenport watched, uneasy now. What are you doing? He asked. Celine closed the notebook and placed it back in her bag with the careful calm of a woman filing away evidence before grief could blur it. Remembering the day you confused silence with consent, she said. Then she turned from the marble table and walked toward the elevator, leaving the divorce papers unopened beside the calendar that had just taught her why he was in such a hurry. Long before Wall Street learned Davenport Hale's name, Celine Whitaker learned how to hear danger inside a sentence that sounded profitable. 8 years earlier, Hale Point Analytics existed in a rented Brooklyn office above a printing shop that smelled like toner, rain, and burnt coffee. The floorboards creaked when anyone walked too quickly, the heat failed twice a week in winter, and the conference room was separated from the rest of the office by a glass wall that did not quite close. Davenport called it temporary. Celine called it honest. There were 4 employees then, counting the intern who watered the dying plant near the window, and there was no communications team, no investor relations staff, no glossy language about changing the future of financial data. There was only Davenport pacing beneath fluorescent lights, talking faster than his own numbers could support, and Celine sitting at the end of the table with a pencil, a laptop, and the patience to catch what ambition missed. She had not been hired officially at first. She had come after work, still wearing her badge from a compliance job in Midtown, bringing sandwiches in a paper bag and a mind sharpened by years of reading documents other people skimmed. Davenport had vision, no one could deny that. He saw a platform that could help banks detect risk patterns before losses became headlines. But he did not yet understand that investors did not buy vision unless the math knew how to stand without shaking. Celine built the first clean forecast. She rewrote the customer acquisition assumptions. She caught the clause in a data partnership agreement that would have given away more ownership than HalePoint could survive. Davenport had laughed when she first circled it. Then their attorney read it and went quiet. After that, Davenport stopped laughing at her caution. On the night before their first serious venture meeting, the office was empty except for the 2 of them. Outside, rain ran down the windows and turned the streetlights into long yellow smears. Davenport stood at the whiteboard, sleeves rolled, tie loose, trying to explain the product in a way that made him sound visionary. Instead of desperate, Celine listened for 10 minutes, then stood, erased half the board, and drew 3 columns. Risk, trust, timing. That is what they are buying, she said. Not your software. Their fear of being late. Davenport stared at the board, then at her, and something softened in his face. The next morning, he used those words. The investors leaned forward. One of them asked who had written the framing. Davenport glanced at Celine, sitting quietly near the back with a legal pad on her knees, and said, "My wife sees the truth before I can name it." For a while, he meant it. When the first check cleared, he pulled her into the hallway and whispered that if HalePoint ever became real, her name belonged on it. Weeks later, at a folding table in that same office, he signed the founder advisory agreement that gave her a protected interest for the work no salary had ever paid for. He barely read the final page. Celine did. She read every word before she signed because love made her generous, but it never made her careless. Years later, in the penthouse above Tribeca, when the divorce papers appeared beside the IPO calendar, that memory returned to her not as nostalgia, but as a receipt. As HalePoint grew, the rooms around Davenport changed faster than the truth could keep up. The Brooklyn office gave way to a full floor in Soho, then 2 floors in Midtown, then a headquarters with smoked glass doors and a lobby screen that played his interviews on a silent loop. His name became a headline before it became a habit. Founder, visionary, market disruptor. The words followed him from business magazines to conference stages to private dinners where investors shook his hand with both of theirs. Celine watched it happen from close enough to see the stitching. She saw the speeches before they became applause. She saw the financial models before they became confidence. She saw the risk memos before they became decisions Davenport delivered as instinct. At first, he still pulled her into the room. Celine caught this. He would say when a contract needed rewriting. Celine saw the issue. He would say when a deal avoided collapse. But success has a way of teaching some men to edit memory in their own favor. Slowly, his sentences changed. We became I. Our framework became my strategy. The clause she saved him from became a challenge he had anticipated. Her late nights became support. Her judgment became loyalty. Her name moved from the center of the story to the thank you line at the end, and even that began to disappear. At investor galas, Celine stood beside him in elegant dresses, smiling when introduced as his beautiful wife, while men who had built nothing but opinions told Davenport he had changed the future of risk intelligence. She did not need them to kneel before her work, but she noticed when they stepped over it. The first time a journalist asked what role she played at HalePoint, Davenport answered before she could. "Celine keeps me grounded," he said warmly, placing one hand at the small of her back as cameras flashed. Grounded, not strategic, not foundational, not the woman who had read every page he was too impatient to respect. Grounded, like furniture, like weather, like something steady in the background while brilliance moved forward. That night, in the car home, she looked out at the wet lights of Park Avenue and asked, Is that what I am now? Davenport loosened his tie, tired from being admired. Do not make a compliment sound like an insult. It depends on what the compliment is hiding. He sighed as if her hurt were another line item demanding attention. Celine, the company is entering a public phase. Perception matters. Perception arrived 2 months later wearing a cream suit and diamond earrings. Vivian Cross was introduced as a communications advisor for the road to the public market. Though everyone understood, she brought more than messaging. She had a society name, a polished smile, and the effortless confidence of someone who had never needed to prove she belonged in expensive rooms. She knew how to stand beside Davenport when photographers gathered. She knew which donors to greet, which bankers to flatter, which reporters needed a whisper before a headline became useful. Celine watched Davenport brighten under that kind of attention, watched him become smoother, louder, more certain. That the company needed glamour more than memory. At the pre-roadshow reception at a private club off Fifth Avenue, Vivian touched his arm while speaking to a banker, and Davenport did not move away. Celine saw it from across the room. A small gesture, nothing dramatic enough to accuse, but familiar enough to explain the sudden distance in his voice. Later, when Davenport introduced Vivian to a group of investors as the woman helping us tell HalePoint's future, Celine felt the old Brooklyn office flicker in her mind. The scratched table, the rain, the whiteboard, the 3 words she had written that made investors lean forward. Risk, trust, timing. She understood then that Davenport was not only preparing the company for Wall Street. He was preparing a version of the story where Celine had never mattered enough to complicate the celebration. The settlement draft arrived 2 days after Davenport placed the divorce papers beside the IPO calendar, and it was written with the tenderness of a locked door. Celine read it at the small dining table in the short-term apartment she had taken in Chelsea, the city moving beyond the windows in gray winter light. The document called itself generous. It offered cash, a clean apartment transfer, a confidential separation, and language about mutual respect. It also asked her to waive, release, disclaim, and forever surrender any present or future claim connected to HalePoint Analytics, its subsidiaries, its equity, its advisory arrangements, its intellectual property, its anticipated public offering, and any appreciation in value occurring before or after the marriage. Celine read that paragraph 3 times, not because she did not understand it, but because she understood it too well. People only built fences that high around something they feared you might still own. Davenport's attorney had attached a polite note asking for a prompt response due to time-sensitive corporate events. Celine almost heard his voice inside that phrase. Hurry. Be reasonable. Do not complicate the future. She set the papers beside her tea and opened the leather notebook where she had written the opening bell target date. The same date appeared in the settlement schedule, disguised beneath legal language. He wanted the marriage finished before the company became public enough for questions to matter. He wanted her signature not because she was irrelevant, but because somewhere in the paper trail, she was not. The next morning, Celine returned to the storage unit in Brooklyn, where boxes from the early years had been sitting under fluorescent lights and dust. She wore a wool coat and leather gloves, not because it was elegant, but because the storage building never seemed warmer than 50 degrees. Inside the unit were old pitch decks, tax files, a broken desk lamp from the first office, and a banker's box labeled in her own handwriting, HalePoint Early Agreements. She knelt on the concrete floor and opened it slowly. The smell of old paper rose like a memory. There were vendor contracts, insurance forms, board consents from years when the board had fit around a folding table, and finally, inside a blue folder, the founder advisory agreement. Davenport's signature sat on the last page, confident and careless. Celine's signature was beneath it, smaller, neater, dated after a long night when she had read every clause while he checked messages across the room. Protected advisory shares. Voting consent required for material recapitalization. No dilution without written notice and acknowledgement. Repurchase only upon documented approval by both parties. She turned the pages carefully, feeling no triumph, only the cold steadiness that comes when suspicion becomes paper. There was no repurchase approval, no signed release, no notice that matched what HalePoint's later cap table must have assumed. Celine placed the agreement in her bag, closed the box, and sat back on her heels for one quiet moment. Above her, The fluorescent light buzzed. Somewhere down the hall, a storage door rolled shut with a metallic echo. She thought of Davenport calling the settlement generous. She thought of Vivian standing beside him in rooms built for cameras. She thought of the woman she had been in that Brooklyn office, tired and hopeful, believing a promise could survive success if it had been spoken with enough sincerity. That woman had not been foolish. She had simply trusted a man who later confused her grace with disappearance. By noon, Celine was in the office of Marlowe Finch, a securities attorney with silver hair, sharp glasses, and a view of lower Manhattan that seemed designed to remind clients how expensive mistakes could become. He read the agreement in silence, then read the settlement draft, then leaned back and looked at her over the frames. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "your ex-husband is not asking you to wave a fantasy. He is asking you to bury a problem." Celine looked down at the blue folder resting on his desk. For the first time since the penthouse, the ache in her chest made room for something cleaner. "Then we should not bury it," she said. "We should read it into the record." For 2 weeks, Celine said nothing in public, and because she said nothing, Davenport believed he had contained her. He continued moving through the pre-public offering season as if the future were still waiting for him with its hands folded. He appeared on financial television in a Navy suit, speaking about transparency, trust, and responsible growth, while Vivian sat in the green room behind the cameras, reviewing clips on her phone before they were even posted. A business magazine photographed them at a private investor dinner and called her his communications force. The article mentioned his divorce in one sentence, neat and bloodless, as if a marriage could be folded into a footnote and stored beneath a stock chart. Celine read the article once from Marlowe Finch's conference room, then slid it aside without comment. On the table before them were documents that mattered more than photographs. Cap tables from 4 different years, shareholder notices, board consents, option grant schedules, and a series of recapitalization summaries that treated her protected advisory shares as if they had evaporated out of courtesy. Marlowe marked each inconsistency with a yellow tab. Celine marked them again in her notebook, not because she doubted him, but because the shape of the lie became clearer when she wrote it herself. No signed release. No repurchase approval. No notice of dilution acknowledged. No consent to material recapitalization. The words were dry enough to put most people to sleep, but to Celine they sounded like footsteps returning to a room where she had been erased. "They assumed you would sign the settlement before anyone had to answer this," Marlowe said one afternoon, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. Outside his lower Manhattan office, the sky had turned the color of pewter. "And if I do not sign?" Celine asked. "Then their public offering council has a governance issue. Maybe a solvable one, but not a quiet one." Quiet. That was the word Davenport had always trusted. Quiet wife. Quiet labor. Quiet exit. Quiet waiver. Quiet disappearance. Celine closed the cap table and placed her palm flat on the cover until the paper stopped shifting beneath her hand. "Then we make it accurate," she said. She did not call reporters. She did not post hints online. She did not send Vivian a message or ask mutual friends what Davenport was saying about her. Instead, she let Marlowe send a formal notice to Hale Point's Securities Council requesting confirmation of her share status, voting rights, and all historical notices connected to recapitalization events. The response came back too polished and too fast. Hale Point claimed all matters had been resolved through internal corporate actions. Marlowe read the letter aloud, then stopped at one sentence and gave a humorless smile. "They are hoping confidence will do the work of evidence." Celine looked toward the framed skyline on his wall. It worked for him before. Not with the Securities and Exchange Commission reading over his shoulder, Marlowe said. By the end of the week, the notice had reached the outside law firm handling the public filing. One associate, probably exhausted, probably careful in the way junior lawyers are when mistakes can become careers, asked the question no one at Hale Point wanted spoken. Where was Celine Whitaker's signed release? That question moved through email chains, partner calls, banker updates, and late-night meetings until it finally reached Davenport's office. He called her at 11:17 that night. Celine watched his name glow. On her phone from across the room. She let it ring. After the 4th call, a message arrived. "We need to discuss this like adults." Celine almost recognized the man in that sentence. Not the man she loved, but the man who still believed maturity meant she should make his problem easier to hide. She typed nothing. Across town, under the glass lights of Hale Point's headquarters, the opening bell calendar was still pinned to the wall. But now, for the first time, the date looked less like destiny and more like a question. The question about Celine's missing release did not arrive at Hale Point like an accusation. It arrived as an email marked routine, forwarded from outside counsel to the chief legal officer, then to the finance team, then to Davenport just after midnight with 3 words in the subject line: requires immediate attention. Davenport read it alone in his office while the building around him had gone nearly dark. The only light came from the city beyond the glass and the blue glow of the opening bell calendar on the wall, still circled, still waiting, still pretending certainty. For several seconds, he did not move. He read the associate's question again. Please confirm whether Celine Whitaker executed a release, repurchase consent, or waiver relating to founder advisory shares and related voting rights. The language was dry. That made it worse. It did not sound emotional. It did not sound like divorce. It sounded like a file that would not close. Davenport stood and walked to the window, looking down at the streets where taxis moved through Manhattan like small yellow warnings. Behind him, Vivian Cross sat on the sofa with a tablet in her lap, her cream blazer folded neatly beside her, her shoes placed together under the coffee table as if elegance could organize panic. She had stayed late to review media prep for the roadshow. Now the media prep lay forgotten. Is it serious? She asked. Davenport did not answer quickly enough. Vivian's face changed. She was used to managing headlines, not ownership defects. Davenport. He turned back. It is a documentation issue. The phrase sounded thin even to him. His chief legal officer arrived 20 minutes later with 2 associates and a banker on speakerphone. Coffee appeared. Files opened. The conference room filled with the particular silence of expensive people realizing that a small, overlooked document might cost more than anyone wanted to say aloud. They pulled archived records from old servers, acquisition folders, option ledgers, early board packets, and scanned agreements from the Brooklyn years. Celine's name appeared again and again in places Davenport had trained himself not to see. Advisory consent. Protected interest. Notice required. Signature pending. Signature missing. Signature not found. By 3 in the morning, the banker's voice on the speaker had lost its polish. We cannot take a governance ambiguity into investor meetings. Not this close. If the cap table is challenged after filing, the risk is not cosmetic. Davenport gripped the back of a chair. So fix it. The legal officer looked at him carefully. We need her cooperation. Her. The word entered the room and made everyone quieter. Vivian looked toward the table, where Celine's old agreement sat beside the IPO schedule like a ghost with perfect timing. Can you offer more money? She asked. No one answered at first. Davenport hated that pause more than the question. Money had solved almost everything in the world he lived in. It had bought discretion, loyalty, silence, talent, access, speed. But money could not manufacture a signature that had never been given. By morning, Hale Point's headquarters looked unchanged from the outside. The lobby screen still played Davenport's interviews. Assistants still carried coffee. Employees still whispered about the public offering as if they were close enough to touch history. But in the legal conference room on the 38th floor, the calendar had begun to bleed. Investor calls were marked tentative. Filing revisions were flagged. Bankers requested emergency review. Davenport finally called Celine again at 7:12 a.m. This time, he left a voicemail. His voice was calm, careful, almost gentle. Celine, we need to resolve this before it becomes something neither of us can control. Across town, in Marlowe Finch's office, Celine listened to the message once. She stood by the window with the city waking beneath her, the blue folder resting on the desk behind her. Marlowe watched her face, waiting. Celine handed him the phone without expression. Schedule the meeting, she said, and make sure the board is present. The emergency meeting was scheduled for noon in Hale Point's main boardroom, the room Davenport had designed to impress investors before they heard a single number. It sat on the 42nd floor, wrapped in glass, with a long walnut table, black leather chairs, and a view of Manhattan sharp enough to make ambition look reasonable. By 11:45, the room was already full. Board members sat with untouched coffee. Investment bankers whispered near the window. Outside counsel arranged binders with color-coded tabs. The chief legal officer kept checking her phone as if a missing signature might appear through force of habit. Davenport stood at the head of the table in a dark suit, handsome, controlled, and pale beneath the conference lights. Vivian sat 2 seats away in a cream dress and tailored jacket, her tablet closed for once. Her public smile stored somewhere she could not reach it. "This should be simple," Davenport said, though no one had asked. "Celine wants leverage. We give her a number, she signs, and we move on." The board chair looked at him without comfort. "The issue is not only financial anymore." Davenport's eyes narrowed. "Everything is financial." The door opened before anyone could answer. Marlowe Finch entered first, silver-haired, measured, carrying a leather portfolio. Then Celine Whitaker walked in behind him. She wore a black suit cut with quiet precision, a white silk blouse, and no jewelry except small gold earrings. Her hair fell in smooth, dark waves around a face that gave the room nothing to feed on. No anger, no apology, no sign that she had once stood in a penthouse while the man at the head of this table tried to erase her before the market opened. Every chair seemed to grow still. Davenport did not move, but his hand tightened around the pen he held. Vivian looked at Celine and then quickly away, as if seeing the difference between presence and performance for the first time. Marlowe stopped beside the table. "Miss Whitaker is here as a shareholder of record with unresolved rights under the Founder Advisory Agreement." One of the bankers closed his laptop halfway. The click sounded too loud. Davenport gave a thin laugh. "She is here because she is my ex-wife." Celine looked at him then, calm as glass. "I am here because your cap table says I disappeared." The sentence did not rise, but it moved through the room with more force than shouting. Davenport leaned forward. "You had years to raise this. I had years to trust that the man who signed beside me would not pretend my signature meant less than his." A director near the center of the table looked down at the old agreement in front of him. Davenport's voice dropped. "Do not make this personal." Celine placed her blue folder on the walnut table, one careful motion in a room full of expensive panic. "You made it personal when you put divorce papers beside an opening bell calendar." No one spoke. Even Vivian stopped breathing visibly. Marlowe opened the folder and slid one page toward the board chair. Celine remained standing. "Before HalePoint tells the public its ownership records are complete," she said, "show this room where I signed away the shares you are asking Wall Street to ignore." Davenport looked at the page, then at the faces around the table, and the performance he had carried for years finally met a silence it could not manage. Marlowe Finch did not ask the room to believe Celine. He asked the room to read. That was the first mistake Davenport could not interrupt. Page by page, the securities attorney laid out the agreement with the patience of a man placing stones across deep water. The original Founder Advisory Agreement, the protected share clause, the voting consent language, the recapitalization notices that should have been sent, and the repurchase approval that did not exist. Each document was simple on its own. Together, they became a wall. The board chair adjusted his glasses and read the final page twice. The chief legal officer sat very still, one hand resting near a pen she had stopped using. Across the table, a banker whispered to another banker, and both looked toward the opening bell calendar with the same expression people wear when a celebration begins to resemble a liability. Davenport remained standing at the head of the table, but the room had stopped arranging itself around him. "This is procedural," he said. His voice had not broken, but it had lost its polish. "We can amend the filing, settle the matter, and proceed." Marlowe looked up. "Only if Miss Whitaker consents to the corrections, the revised disclosure, and the treatment of her voting rights." The board chair turned to Celine. "What exactly are you requesting?" Celine did not rush to answer. She looked at the table where her name appeared in documents that had waited years to be seen. She thought of the Brooklyn office above the printing shop, the whiteboard, the rain, the first check, the night Davenport promised her name belonged on the company if it ever became real. Then she looked at the board chair, not at her ex-husband. "An independent review of all equity changes involving my advisory shares," she said. "A corrected cap table. Written disclosure of any past governance failures. And no public filing until those corrections are complete." The silence after that was not confusion. It was math. Everyone in the room understood what delay meant. Roadshow pressure, investor questions, legal costs, a possible shift in valuation, the opening bell date turning from a promise into a negotiation. Vivian's tablet sat closed in front of her, useless now. There was no message strategy for a missing signature. Davenport's face tightened. You know what this could do to the company? Celine finally looked at him. Yes, that is why I read what I signed. A director near the window lowered his eyes. The words were not cruel. They were worse. They were accurate. Davenport stepped closer to the table. You are punishing me. No, Celine said. I am correcting the record. He let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but there was no confidence in it. You could have come to me privately. For the first time, Celine's expression changed, just slightly, the smallest shadow crossing her eyes. I was your wife privately. You erased me publicly. The boardroom held that sentence as if it had weight. Outside, Manhattan glittered in the afternoon sun, indifferent and expensive. Inside, the company that was supposed to tell Wall Street a clean story had to admit the first draft had been written around a woman who still owned part of the ending. The board did not vote that afternoon. It recessed. That was the word the chair used, careful and neutral, but everyone in the room understood that the opening bell had lost its certainty. Bankers closed laptops without meeting Davenport's eyes. Outside counsel gathered binders with the slow precision of people already preparing revised language. The chief legal officer asked Marlowe Finch for a formal list of requested corrections, and Marlowe handed it over as if he had carried it in his briefcase for years. Celine signed nothing before leaving. She did not accept a private side offer, did not soften the disclosure request, did not let anyone turn accuracy into a personal favor. She only placed the blue folder back into her bag and walked out of the boardroom with the same quiet posture she had carried into it. In the corridor, the Hale Point logo glowed on a glass wall beside the elevator bank, silver letters floating above a city that had been promised a cleaner story than the one now sitting in the conference room. Celine pressed the elevator button. Marlowe stood beside her, silent, giving the moment room. Behind them, the boardroom doors opened. Davenport stepped out alone. For once, Vivian was not beside him. His suit was still immaculate, his hair still controlled, but the force around him had changed. He looked less like the founder of a company about to meet Wall Street, and more like a man who had just discovered the floor beneath his future had someone else's signature inside it. Celine, he said. She turned. His voice lowered. You are going to destroy everything I built. The old version of her might have answered the accusation. She might have reminded him of forecasts rewritten at midnight, contracts saved before dawn, investor language shaped in rented rooms while rain ran down Brooklyn windows. She might have asked why the word I still came so easily to him. But she had learned that some men did not hear history until it appeared in legal exhibits. No, Davenport, she said. What I build is finally being counted. His face tightened, and for a second anger tried to rescue him from shame. This was supposed to be our future once. Celine looked at him carefully. There was grief in that sentence, but also theft. Our future had become his brand, his valuation, his celebration, his woman beside him in photographs, his settlement draft asking her to disappear before the market opened. It was, she said. Then you rewrote it without me and asked me to sign the ending. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Neither of them moved at first. Through the glass wall behind him, Celine could see Vivian standing inside the boardroom near the abandoned IPO calendar, her tablet in her hands, her face pale with the uselessness of charm in a room governed by signatures. Davenport followed Celine's gaze, then looked back with something quieter than anger. Can we fix this? He asked. Celine stepped into the elevator. Marlowe followed. She turned before the doors closed, her expression calm enough to be kind and final enough to be free. The company can be fixed, she said. The lie cannot. The doors slid shut on Davenport standing beneath his own logo, surrounded by glass, money, and the first silence he could not convert into applause. Hours later, Hale Point's roadshow schedule was delayed pending governance review. Reporters would call it a complication. Investors would call it a risk. Lawyers would call it disclosure. Celine called it something simpler. Truth entering the file. She did not stop the bell to destroy him. She stopped the lie from ringing louder than the truth.